This podcast is recorded on stolen and unceded Aboriginal land.
We acknowledge the First Nations and elders of this country, and we join their calls for justice.
I believe that the most important freedom we have is the right to speak freely and the right to assemble, and above all, the right to communicate with our own members of parliament, and that's precisely what we were doing.
All right, first things first, Vale to a king, to someone who is based, as the kids might say.
He goes off.
He went off, King. Sunday, December the 5th, which was World Soils Day.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Peter Cundall passed away, and people have been talking about it all this week, and I've been researching him this morning, and I was crying. I was watching clips of him, and I was crying because he was the fucking best.
I have to say, I wasn't super familiar with Mr. Peter Cundall.
Me neither, but I didn't know all this shit either. I just knew him as the guy who came on the ABC when he was hosting Gardening Australia, okay? And, you know, so people know, he was the host of Gardening Australia, but he was like, he did gardening talkback on ABC radio or local radio back in the late 60s, then hosted Gardening Australia for 18 years from 1990 to 2008. And he passed away at 94, you know, a wonderful innings and was much loved and stuff. So we can celebrate his life and his influence. But just all this shit came out about how he was a leftist goddamn hero that we should celebrate every single day.
The communist gardener.
He was a commie. He's born in like the 20s, okay? Working class Manchester politics involved. Lives through the Great Depression, has a rough childhood, conscripted into war, sees war, the horrors of war, eventually volunteers for the Australian Army, begins to hate and despise war. His job is like recruiting new people into the army, and he's just pumping out all these pacifists. Like he's just, and then eventually runs in 1961 as a Senate candidate for the Australian Communist Party.
Love it.
And he's very proud of the fact that he got a world record for the lowest voting ever in the history of elections.
No.
He says he thinks he got about 20 votes. And this is him talking to Andrew Denton. Andrew Denton says, why didn't you vote for himself? He didn't even vote for himself. He said, because I was number 3 on the ticket and I thought it was disloyal to put myself. I felt it was almost disloyal to put myself number 1 because I was number 3.
This man. Okay, that fucking rules.
But it's so good. And then Andrew Denton says, I don't think you were cut out for politics. And Peter Cundall says, maybe not, no. I mean, I was quite passionate because, you see, I would join the Communist Party, but I still believe in the same things that drove me to do so. You know, an end to war, an end to poverty, a decent education for everyone, a decent medical service for everyone. And we can afford it, you know? We can afford these things.
Oh, my God.
So then he's going through that, and then throughout his entire life never stops. He's arrested at age 83 for protesting on the steps of the Tasmanian Parliament, trying to put an end to the dirty, stinking, rotten Guns pulp mill in the Tamar Valley where he lived in Tassie, which he desperately wanted to stop because it fucking sucked, and they goddamn won.
Mm-hmm.
He did events with Peter Wish-Wilson talking about the Anzac Day, like reflecting on the politics of Anzac Day and how it's a little bit messed up and how, you know, he's an anti-war activist and he doesn't want that kind of commemoration to celebrate war, like getting into that with Peter Wish-Wilson, a Green senator from Tassie. It just goddamn hero. This is the best quote. Now, this is a little bit long, I'm sorry, but I just think it like sums up Peter Cundall and everything that I love about him. Okay,
hit me with
this. This is an interview we gave at the National Museum in 2009. I've been involved in every campaign, not only for the environment, but against war. I've been a soldier in 3 wars. My first experience of war was as a 13-year-old in the Manchester Blitz as a messenger boy, running through the burning streets and seeing bodies everywhere. I saw the horrors of the concentration camp. I saw what happened in the horrors, and it was horrible in the Palestine War. And in Korea, when I arrived, there were hillsides were covered with dead bodies. It was covered with bodies rotting away with great masses of green grass around them. As they were rotting, they were feeding the grass. There were bodies everywhere. I've seen it. So it's turned me, and you'll never meet an old digger, an old soldier that likes war. You don't see it. You see old geezers from the First World War, and they say, never have a war. They have been there. Whenever I'm publicly interviewed, not like this, but on air, on television, and they ask me about these things, I always say one thing which never goes to air. It is never repeated. That is why I always say it at a place like this. What I say is, have you ever noticed that the people who send young men and women to war are never the ones that go themselves? Gets a round of applause. And that is always edited out. Why? I don't know. But it's a fact of life that the people who send young people to war haven't done it. If you read the newspapers, pick up the Australian, and you see this extraordinary editorial policy they have now, which is almost as if it comes straight out of the neocons in the White House or from the Israeli embassy. That's it. That's their policy. Very, very right. I'm talking about the Likudnik policy. That is what you get in there. You read these journalists that write, let's have another war. Let's send our troops to Afghanistan. Let's send more of them. Greg Sheridan, he's never seen a war in his life. He's never been anywhere. There he was. These people are experts. They have never been anywhere. They've seen nothing. They've done nothing. And they are experts on everything. They have their columns in the paper. Andrew Bolt has never been anywhere, never seen anything, never done anything. But they love war as long as somebody else goes. I get angry about this, and I say it if I meet them. But what I'm saying is true. Read the columns if you can be bothered. So I'm against war.
Holy shit. Okay, that's fucking incredible.
Fucking king.
Oh my God. You know, people are always saying we should change our name from the Greens. Like, just something like Peter Cundall Appreciation Society Party.
We are Cundall stands.
The Greens Party is a party of hatred.
They're not green. They don't seem to care about the environment.
As the Greens are kryptonite to the federal Labor government, so the Greens will be kryptonite to the state Labor government.
Frankly, I've always found the Greens to be a real serious danger to Australia.
Serious danger to Australia.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. Tom's allowed me to do the welcome, so I'm really excited about it. This is me, Emerald, and I'm here with Tom Ballard.
Hello.
Hi, Tom.
Hi, everyone. You got to say the name of the show.
Just let me, I'm getting there, Tom. Welcome to the show, which is called Serious Danger. This is a podcast about green politics in Australia. It is not an official Greens Party podcast, to be very clear, but we talk about green stuff, green politics. I think before we get into this week, we wanted to thank our patrons. We've already got some folks chipping in on Patreon, which is really lovely. Thank you, Timothy, Mark, Alex, David, Rowan, Ethan, Andrew, Kim, Jack, and there are more. There are many.
So many more. This is only episode 3. It's so cool that people are getting on board. It just, it means a lot. If you can spare $3 a month, that just helps us cover the costs of the podcast, helps us pay our lovely producer, helps us host the show in various platforms. All the info for that is at patreon.com/seriousdangerau. If you're not in a position to do that, that's cool. Sharing, rating, and reviewing the show, giving us a sweet 5-star review really helps get the word out and gets more people sucked in to this propaganda machine.
This week, we are talking to some guy called Adam Bandt who just kept messaging us. He kept sending his DMs. He's like, let me come on the show. Please, you guys are so awesome. Eventually, we're like, look, fine. So Adam Bandt, we'll be talking to him later on in the show.
Very quickly, last weekend was the New South Wales local elections. Shout outs, respect to every single candidate for the Greens and every volunteer. It was good news, a great result for the party across the board. I'm seeing something like a statewide increase of councillors of almost 20%. Okay, so
hell yeah, that's amazing.
Which is fantastic. 56 local councillors for the Greens in 2017 in New South Wales, up to 67. That's at the moment. There's still a lot of counting happening and that kind of thing. But that's pretty good news. So thumbs up and well done. Sylvie Ellesmore, who's a legend, who was running for the mayor of City of Sydney, missed out. Clover Moore continues because she will be in power until the end of time. But she did get elected to council. Sylvie Ellesmore, Greens, is back on the City of Sydney Council, which is fantastic news. Now, what about in your neck of the woods, or the old Byron Shire?
Yes.
Huge swing against the Greens, something like a 20% swing against the Greens, 35% swing to the Byron Independents. Do you know much about this?
Yeah. And a lot of the independents are also former Greens or sort of Greens adjacent. It's interesting. I get the updates on the local Byron politics from my mum. And she was explaining to me, how she voted. But I think there's a real kind of sense of, there's a bit of disillusionment. We don't really know. I'm not so across the politics and why that might have happened. But it is an interesting thing to see such a big result for independents. And thinking about, we know there's going to be lots of independents running in the federal election and what impact that might have on the Greens and on other parties and how we can kind of work with that. So it is an interesting result.
I looked at the Byron Independence website and it's like all these, I guess in Byron, even the most right-wing Byron person is probably pretty environmentally friendly. But I think we can't be naive about the fact that even though we're a third party, we're not one of the two major parties, we're still a party that's been around for a long time. And if there's a broad anti-political establishment stuff, a vibe in the electorate for a lot of these things, then the Greens aren't going to be immune to that. And some people really do love independence, the idea, regardless of what that independence ideological worldview might be, the fact that they're not in a political party is very attractive, you know?
Yeah.
Death tax will kill your family's wealth. No to death tax. No to death tax. Vote for the 19 party.
All right, let's talk about what happens when we die. Emerald, please.
Wow, we're going to solve that existential problem right here. I'm so excited. Tom, what happens when we die?
Well, I don't know what happens existentially to the soul, but if you have a bunch of money, then maybe your money will go to your children. And this week, the Productivity Commission released a report on this question as to whether or not inheritances are increasing wealth inequality in Australia. Interesting report. Its report found that in the past 20 years, wealthier households have received larger inheritances on average than poorer households.
Wow,
Weird.
that's just groundbreaking stuff.
Those inheritances have contributed to an increase in absolute wealth inequality. However, growth in asset prices, particularly property values, is having a much bigger impact on wealth inequality in Australia. So I suppose they're trying to thread this kind of needle in that, you know, this might be a problem, but it's not as bad, or it's not the number one thing that's increasing wealth inequality in the country.
Yeah, it's a quite bizarrely messaged report. Like, this is meant to be, you know, a theoretically non-partisan kind of government agency, the Productivity Commission. But yeah, there was the messaging that came out with this report that was like, no, inheritance transfers aren't making inequality worse. In fact, they may even be helping to improve equality. But what they meant was on a relative measure, because if you're more wealthy, the amount of money that you transfer to your child is not going to mean as much to them because they're probably already wealthy. Whereas for poorer people, it's going to be a smaller amount of wealth that they're transferring, but it'll mean a lot to them because they need fucking money so much. But like, that was the message that they went with. And the fact that media actually ran with this, not everyone, but some media outlets were like, it's okay. Inheritances are making inequality not so bad. Don't worry about it.
Productivity Commissioner Catherine de Fontenay, which I'm sorry, that name just makes me think of Fauntleroy. Which doesn't help the game. Catherine de Fontenay says inheritances are reducing some measures of relative wealth inequality across the country. Wealthier people receive more inheritances and gifts on a dollar-for-dollar basis, but less as a percentage of their existing wealth. When measured against the amount of wealth they already own, those with less wealth get a much bigger boost from inheritances on average, about 50 times larger for the poorest 20% than the wealthiest 20%.
Yeah,
so, yes,
I mean,
as you say, it's all relative. Money's all relative, you know? Rich people, a grandma dies, you get, 200 grand. Mate, I spend that on a weekend. Who gives a shit?
Yeah.
There was another line from this report. Children tend to enjoy a similar relative wealth position to that of their parents, the report found, but only about a third of intergenerational wealth persistence is due to inherited wealth. The rest comes from all the other things parents give to their children: education, networks, values, and other opportunities, Productivity Commissioner Lisa Gropp said. So, yes, I mean, obviously all those other things affect the wealth inequality that we're talking about and the way that's inherited. We're not just saying that like everything happens when your rich parent dies, but obviously the private school that they send you to and all their family networks play a role too, clearly.
Yeah, but I mean, okay, two things about this. First of all, the way that they kind of just dismissively are like, only a third of, intergenerational inequality is impacted by this. So that means that if we actually did something about this, we could reduce that intergenerational inequality by a third, which is fucking massive and worth pursuing.
Yes.
That's the first thing. The second thing is it's like, yeah, so clearly the argument that they're clearly trying to stave off with this messaging about an inheritance tax is often that people, this is really necessary. People want to be able to set their child up using things that they've quote unquote worked for, the wealth that they've quote unquote worked for, to set their child up for a good life. But it turns out that that's actually not even how this works. They don't get that inheritance when they would need it to get job opportunities or for education or to kind of get started early in life. Usually the inheritance comes at a later age and when it's less needed. Yeah, it's the fact of growing up wealthy that gives you those increased chances at a good life anyway. So the arguments that are used to fight the so-called death tax really just bloody crumble.
I want to come to the death tax, inheritance tax just in a sec, but I think it's important, the point to make, and maybe we can go to this deeper one day, but like we're not being conspiratorial when we talk about the Productivity Commission being a pretty ideologically guided outfit of the government. It's supposed to be this sort of independent think tank. But, you know, in my reading of a whole bunch of reports I've come out with, it is a constant justification of the current economic status quo, backing in of neoliberalism. They did a report on inequality in Australia a few years ago that someone like Tom Switzer from the Centre for Independent Studies regularly cites, pointing out that inequality is not a problem in this country. And, you know, it's pretty good in Australia. We're pretty in line with other countries that inequality is happening in. And I read through that report and it's like, oh, yeah, real incomes have increased, which is good. But the same proportion of Australians living in poverty in 1988 was the same as 2016. Okay, so you got 9% of people living in poverty in Australia in 1988, same proportion, 20 years later. So we've had all these economic reforms. Everything's fine. And there's just not a problem anymore. That's all sorted.
No,
they also had a report a few years ago raising the question as to whether free TAFE was distorting the market of tertiary education in Victoria. You know what I mean? Like we've got all these private providers and they have to compete with this free TAFE that the Victorian government is offering.
Dodgy private providers that like prey on vulnerable people and give them shit so-called skills. And yeah, that's... Wow.
This story jumped out at us because we felt like, inheritance taxes was something, / death taxes was something that played a massive role in the 2019 election through scare campaign in various ways. And the Greens have policies on this.
Yeah. And also, Mike, our producer, can we please get like a thunderbolt kind of crack there and then, my voice be really low and scary as we say
death taxes.
Because that's kind of how a lot of people in Australia would probably know inheritance taxes right now, is by the scare campaign that was run by the LNP and was it also Palmer?
Started by Palmer and then sort of sexily alluded to by the LNP, I would say, during 2019.
Right, yeah. And this was attacking Labor, but also it was Labor and the Greens. First of all, on the misconception that an inheritance tax would just mean that, it applies to everyone, and when you die, all of your beautiful possessions and hard-earned money or whatever are just taken away from you willy-nilly, when in actual fact, most inheritance taxes should and do only apply to very small proportion of the population for very significant wealth transfers. We're talking really wealthy families here.
As someone has pointed out to me, if you have to be taxed, when you die is really the ideal time to do it. It's not your fucking problem. But it's extraordinary. I mean, it's hard to underline just how unique Australia is on this front. In the US or the UK, you have these kind of taxes that happen all the time. It's perfectly accepted. My understanding is there's a great article in the Saturday paper we can include in the show notes about the history of this. Basically, in the great state of Queensland, your mate, Joe Bjorky-Peterson, did away with death duties, right? Lower taxes. They'll tax you to death. Yeah, get rid of that. And then all the other states freaked out because they said, well, everyone will want to go to Queensland to die because Queensland, the sunshine state, the place to die, and your kids can get all your money. And so, progressively after the 70s, basically across the country, it was done away with, and it was politically toxic to argue that, the rich should be able to pass on all their wealth, all their assets to their children without any of that money go to the state to make things better for people who can't afford food or housing.
Yeah.
It's a perfectly reasonable thing to do. It's a good thing to do. I think in the States too, the Democrats try to introduce something like the Hilton tax. They try to name it after when Paris Hilton was in the news all the time. Like, there is probably a branding issue once you get from inheritance to death. You got to rename it like the Reinhardt tax or the fucking Palmer tax or something like that.
Which is what we should have done, right? And we can. And I think, again, I reckon if this had come up, and it may well again come up this election, I would hope that the Greens will go hard and say, no, fucking billionaires shouldn't just be able to hand over their wealth to their kids who've been born with a silver spoon in their mouth anyway and have had everything they've ever needed, while 10% of the population is living without the basic necessities. And there's this fantastic quote, though, that I found in an ABC article about the death tax from many years ago. So this is a quote from venture capitalist Mark Carnegie, who, look, we wouldn't normally quote from venture capitalists, but nevertheless, it's a good quote. So Mark Kanji perhaps sums it up best in his in-principle support of inheritance taxation, despite the fact that his estate would be affected. He says, I don't believe that the only tax-free occupation available in Australia should be sitting in a Toorak coffee bar waiting for your dad or mum to die.
Well said.
I believe the children are future. Teach them well and let them be.
Of course, another way to get around the whole intergenerational inequality wealth thing, Emerald, is to just not have babies at all, to have no future generations that we need to worry about passing our wealth on to.
Absolutely. Well, according to a lot of Australia, maybe people are heading that way. The other story, it got a little bit of coverage in the news this week, but not heaps, was that new ABS stats show that the fertility rate has fallen to a record low in Australia. And I'll read just a quick kind of summary of what that means. So this is in The Guardian. Australia's fertility rate continues to plummet, with registered births dropping below 300,000 for the first time in 14 years. Figures released by the ABS on Wednesday showed there were 294,369 registered births in 2020, a decrease of 3.7% from 2019. The previous year's decline was 3%. Importantly, the total fertility rate fell to a record low 1.58 babies per woman, extending the decline from 2.02 in 2008.
Just 1.58 babies makes me laugh.
1.58 babies. Yeah, that's right. The rate rose from about 2.1, the population replacement rate, in the early 1930s to a peak 3.55 babies per woman in 1962. So that's a pretty massive difference in the last.
That's your baby boom right there, my friends.
So yeah, that's a massive drop. Clearly people are having fewer babies now, but why?
Babies are cute and fun. They're adorable.
Babies are cute and fun. That's right. So why are we not having so many? So there was an article in The Conversation that was analysing the HILDA report, and for non-nerds, HILDA is the Household Income and Labour Dynamics in Australia report. And this article was citing a few kind of just basic boring nerd reasons, like, women have better access to birth control, and particularly this article was about women are having babies later and then often struggling to conceive later in life. But that's happening because they're spending longer in education in the workforce because, feminism, etc. Good stuff. That's awesome. But I feel like what none of these articles did speak about is the fact that maybe people aren't having babies because there's this real sense of anxiety.
No, I mean, there is an economic reality to having children, right? And this is why, it's so infuriating to see prominent economists will say stuff like, oh, people are just choosing to have babies later. That's weird. And you go, okay, there's a whole bunch of factors there, but one of them absolutely has to be the fact that they don't have money. Having a baby is fucking expensive, has real implications for your career and your working life, particularly with the structures that we have in place when it comes to, childcare and the expenses of various things, including housing. Having a baby while renting would be particularly challenging, I'm sure, more challenging if you don't have a mortgage, for sure. And also there's anxieties over climate change. And, I thought there was something like a COVID baby boom, but I was completely wrong. That's probably just because my brother had a baby this year and she's the best and adorable and better than your baby, if you're listening. But yes, apparently that's simply not the case. And having a child is something of an act of incredible hope, right? And it doesn't feel particularly hopeful in the state of the world right now.
I mean, and it's really funny because there was one report, this was I saw this in the Courier Mail, but it's talking about this, what do they call him? They call him a demography expert, which I didn't know was a thing, but apparently they exist. Mm-hmm. His name is Mr. McCrindle, and he is saying that maybe we need the baby bonus again. So the baby bonus, it was introduced initially by Peter Costello, minister in John Howard's government, and I think it was there was some sort of tax concession around 2001, but the baby bonus proper from 2004 to 2014. And this was a payment it varied, but it was usually around $3,000 for a family that has a child. And there were arguments that worked. Who knows if you can kind of, whether it's causation or correlation, that the birth rate did increase during those years. But a lot of the argument around it is that it worked because it was a simple and a universal payment to incentivize people to have kids. But this article where this guy is calling for the baby bonus, he's saying, look, it's time to relook at some kind of incentive to encourage young couples who are struggling to own a house to commit to having a family. He says the cost of living and unaffordable housing were the key reasons for a lack of babies. And I don't know about you, but I'm like, well, why not just help people buy a home? Maybe, abolish the old negative gearing, build social housing, introduce rent caps, just some ideas. What about free childcare? What about free education from childcare through to uni and TAFE? What about creating a properly resourced social security system and public services so that you can have a child and they're going to have all the things that they need to live a good life, rather than just kind of give them some cash and go, okay, run with it. I just don't know if that's going to be enough for people in this kind of, the world that we live in today. I'm not sure.
Remember Costello's quote, which was have one for mum, one for dad, and one for the country?
Yes.
And it's just okay, demographic aging is an issue and that we need to think about as a society. We can talk about in politics, but just the idea that people should be producing other human beings purely for economic reasons.
It's
to
so
further
cursed.
economic
So
growth.
many articles, when I was, when you read about the birth rate and all these super clinical academics or whatever are yes, the problem of this is a quote. So this means the proportion of Australians who are working age is decreasing. And it is literally the only argument that they have is not yet a hopeful argument about bringing life into the world. It's about creating a workforce. It's this deeply capitalist argument. And so it's we just have to incentivize them to have the child and then push them into the workforce. And that's all we need to do. We don't need to create a better world for people. That's just crazy.
We need more babies to suffer through this shit too.
The other thing we could do with, a little bit more money from taxing les billionaires, something about the old climate crisis.
What?
Because, as you say, I think you mentioned before that's probably another reason that people might be feeling a wee bit anxious is this whole existential doom kind of crisis bearing down upon us. And there was this study done, I think, ahead of the last federal election by a couple of environmental NGOs where they found that 1 in 3 women who were involved in the environmental movement were either didn't want to have children or, were sort of quite unsure about it because of climate change, one in 3. And there have been actually quite a few studies even outside of Australia about this. I saw there was this article in women's magazine Elle, but they interviewed a bunch of women about, whether they were reconsidering having children because of climate change. And there's this one woman, and this quote is quite heartbreaking. So she says, if my hypothetical children were to ask me one day, why did you bring me onto the planet knowing what a dire situation it was in? There's no reasonable answer I could give to justify my actions. There's not much I can do as an individual to stop climate change, but I can do my part to not leave a future generation to suffer through global catastrophe.
Oof.
That is fucking bleak. And honestly, I feel that. I often wonder, my friends and I joke about it. We're well, we've kind of got, maybe 10 years left. And so if we have a child now, then they'll be old enough to physically run in the climate wars and defend themselves. But these are the conversations that I'm having with my friends.
It's obviously a real thing. And I'm not denying it's a factor in people's decisions. I mean, I think there is a concern about this anti-natalist left, this idea that people think not having a child is a political virtuous political act, and that if you have a child that you are contributing to the climate crisis, and you got to think about look at all these breeders out there, they're killing the planet, and then that gets into some very weird population control kind of stuff, and how the biggest issue is we've got too many people on the planet without asking. It's the fucking Thanos argument from Avengers for the nerds out there, when you sort of go, well, no, if you just had a more equitable redistribution of resources and more democratic control over the way things ran, chances are we could actually, have lots of people on this planet living perfectly happy lives and not killing ourselves and the planet in the process. Yeah,
there is that on the one hand where they're I'm anxious about bringing them into that world. And then there are other people who say, oh, well, I feel as though this is, my duty to not contribute to the problem, quote unquote. But which is really sad again, because the fact that the system and capitalism and the people in power who are actually making this crisis worse have managed to convince ordinary people that it's their fault for fucking having a child that the planet is going to burn, that it's not their fault, it's yours. And if you have a baby, then you're a hypocrite if you try and fight for a better future. And I've heard this leveled at people, but no, again, like this is a quote from a Conversation article about this very issue. It says, in reality, the global human population is not increasing exponentially, but is in fact slowing and predicted to stabilize at around 11 billion by 2100. But more importantly, focusing on human numbers obscures the true driver of many of our ecological woes. That is the waste and inequality generated by modern capitalism and its focus on endless growth and profit accumulation. Not babies. Babies are not driving the climate crisis. They're fucking babies.
They're babies, baby. And more people on the left need to have babies. We need more left-wing babies to overpower the right. It's a population.
They look so cute in their little jumpsuits that say like future unionist, you know? And anyway, I mean, maybe the other solution apart from stuff like free childcare and housing and all of those things is a little idea based on our favorite tweet, the tweet about being too horny to come into work. Horny holidays? Maybe people just aren't fucking enough.
more fucking, please.
Yeah. If even the hint of horny, you get the day off work, go have a baby.
Go have a baby. Go do it.
If you don't want to have a baby, that's totally cool. If you do want to have one, that's also cool, and you are not personally responsible for the climate crisis. Go topple the billionaires and smash capitalism instead with your little baby on your hip.
Right? I have the greatest respect for the rule of law, but in this case, I have no choice but to stand up for what I believe is Tasmania. This beautiful state is being destroyed. It's being destroyed environmentally and democratically. Right? The whole of democracy is in jeopardy, and I'm fighting against it.
Our guest today is Adam Bandt, who is the leader of the Australian Greens, and he keeps begging us to come on the show, so here we are. You're welcome, Adam. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for finally letting me on.
You're welcome.
Oh, God, what an annoying fan. What's been your favourite episode of Serious Danger so far, would you say?
Number one, Dorinda. Go Dorinda.
It is so exciting to have you, man. We really appreciate it so early on. It means a lot. And there's been a lot going on in terms of Greens politics, and obviously as the years rounded out, this dog shit year, we've come towards the end of politics. A lot of chat about and focus on the election next year and how that's going to shake out, particularly when it comes to where the Greens will fit into a potential question mark Labor government. So we wanted to sort of touch on those big issues if we could. And we can start with the policy, right? So we got the finally the long-awaited climate policy from the Labor Party over the past couple of weeks. Is there anything good to be said about it?
Yeah, so one commentator described it, I'm paraphrasing a bit, as a half-decent renewables policy wrapped in a terrible climate policy. And I think there's something to be said for that. There's some stuff in there that is similar to what the Greens have been pushing for to get more renewables in the system. What's bad about it is that it keeps coal-fired power stations in the system for just as long as the Liberals. In fact, they've been boasting about that. The Labor's been saying, coal won't close any earlier under us. It's exactly the same as under the Liberals. I don't think that's something to boast about, but they do. And the targets on it are really woeful. They've basically given up on the science. The targets are less than what is needed to meet the climate goals of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees, which is what was agreed on at Glasgow. It's even less than what's required to limit it to 2 degrees, which is what was in the Paris Agreement. So in other words, they've kind of given up on the science, and in setting their targets, they've gone for a target that they hope won't be attacked by the Liberals, but in doing that, they basically just said, we don't mind if Australia heats by over 3 degrees, which is really game over for our country.
Yeah, there's something that we could work with there, but it's obviously something that we would be wanting to improve in many ways if we were in balance of power, along with stuff like getting dental into Medicare and taxing billionaires. But bad news for us, because Labor has said they don't want to work with us. True? Or
yeah, well, I reckon you can file that under things politicians say during an election campaign. I don't believe personally that someone who's within a couple of seats of becoming Prime Minister is going to say, I'm not going to talk to the people who might be able to help me get there.
Yeah.
I think reality is going to kick in after the election, and I think the Greens are going to be in a really strong position and will be able to kick the Liberals out and talk to the next government and say, well, look, we know we'd rather see you than the other mob, but on some conditions, and here are the things that we want to have a discussion about.
Do you think, like, I think a lot of people can look at that and kind of call bullshit on Labor saying that they won't talk to the Greens. But I guess I'm curious, why do you think they are pushing that so heavily? Like, what are they so afraid of? Is this particularly about climate and their sensitivities around climate and their allegiances to, you know, their donors? Or is there something about the fact that the Greens are gaining traction that is leading them to really push back against the idea of us having any power?
Yeah, I think it's the latter. I think it's this sense that there are these movements growing and that are being represented in Parliament, and you've now got people who are saying, yeah, look, I've read the science. I don't want more coal and gas. Right, it just makes sense. I don't want more coal and gas. Can you at least please promise that you're not going to open up new coal and gas mines? Like, people are now just saying, we know we've only got a short period of time and we want to act. And that's coming through and it's being represented in Parliament. And I think that freaks them out.
Yeah.
I do think it freaks them out. And so this idea that they can't control everything and that they might have to work with others in order to be able to run a country is something that is incredibly unsettling for them, but it's only happening because people want it, right?
Yeah, that's very true.
To give Labor their due, I mean, if they are scared about a scare campaign being run about some kind of Labor Greens alliance, I mean, they are correct. That's exactly what the coalition has done. Morrison has pivoted immediately once Labor released their policies to say that the only way they can get this through is working with the Greens. Literally says, if you vote for Labor, you get the Greens, which is just a fucking goddamn lie and insulting to everyone's intelligence. But hey, this is Australian politics. So the question as to whether or not our political enemies will run on the idea of two left-wing parties working together if they find themselves in that position in the Parliament shouldn't be too surprising. The question surely is, what do you do about that?
Yeah, and I mean, this coming from the guy who's currently dependent on George Christensen and Bob Katter, right? This is like, let's just have a bit of a reality check about which minority party is holding the whip hand in the current Parliament.
Yeah.
Like the National Party, which is basically a wholly owned subsidiary of the big coal and gas corporations, we are currently in a minority Parliament, and it's the Nationals who get to decide get to become the Deputy Prime Minister and the direction of the country. So I think point one is to point out that a small group of people wholly owned by the coal and gas corporations are currently able to write this country's policy. Secondly, I think, especially at this election, the appetite for change and for action on climate is huge. And what we're putting on the table and what we're asking for is really nothing more or less than what the science is demanding. And when it comes to the economic side of it, like if they want to come and run a so-called scare campaign that the Greens want to tax the billionaires and get dental into Medicare, then great, because I reckon 80% of people want that, right? And it's probably a bit too much to ask them to be honest in their campaign, but to the extent that we'll have the opportunity in this campaign to say, look, if we're in that position, here's the things we're going to push for. I think they're things that, especially at this election, are going to resonate pretty well.
Yeah.
On that point, I think I have to defer to the wonderful Chris Smith from Sky News, and I just want to share this with you, if I may. This is a good shit. This is the kind of scare campaign they're going for. So this is him doing his little opinion piece on Chris Smith Tonight, my favorite show. This is him looking back at 2010, the last time, the title of this piece is Coalition Between Labor and Greens is not just scary, but possible. And this is him talking about what happened in 2010.
Today's polls tell us that there's a real turn-off towards the major parties. Now, we've seen this movie before in very similar circumstances in 2010. Tony Abbott's coalition and Julia Gillard's Labor Party were on the nose. And so with Labor winning 72 seats and the coalition 73, it's happened. Did Julia Gillard hand the reins to Abbott because she wanted to avoid cuddling up with the Greens? Of course she did not. She signed an alliance with Bob Brown on the 1st of September 2010, which put the major parties equal. And as we now know, independents Rob Oakeshott, Tony Windsor and Andrew Wilkie showed their true colours and joined Julia and Bob's alliance. Now, if you think Labor will refuse to form a slim majority with the Greens in those same circumstances, you're actually grossly ignorant and are not watching. And so what did Gillard sign up to? The formation of a climate change committee, restrictions on political donations, 2.5 hours of allocated debate for private members' bills, access for Greens to various Treasury documents. A sellout to green idealism.
I just love that so much. It's just the most
when they list
mild
the
list.
good things. I love it.
List of these good things that we won last time that apparently was just a sellout. Like, he looked bored just recounting those things.
Turn that into an election ad?
Yeah, honestly.
Yeah, I
just
know.
make sure, can he
I'm upset that he left off dental into Medicare for kids.
Exactly, that's what I was going to say.
Like, there's probably a reason that he left that off.
Yeah.
Like, the more people know that we got dental into Medicare for kids as part of that, the more our vote goes up. But I might just edit that in and use that as an election ad if I can.
Well, later in the piece, I just really quickly, I want to share this next bit. This is him painting the terrifying picture of what might happen if Greens have influence over the next Australian government in some kind of coalition. Here we go.
I'm excited.
So how's this for a new alliance? A 59% emissions target by 2030. That's right in the middle of two bids. They want to extend Medicare. It's on the website today. Of the Greens, that is. They'll extend the NDIS, and both are massive bottomless pits already. They'll increase the dole, free childcare, as we know nothing is free education, including university, and they'll increase foreign aid, no more sovereign borders. Won't that make a difference? More tax on large employers because they hate billionaires.
Don't threaten me with a good time, Chris Smith.
Wow.
So good,
you
right?
say that like it's a bad thing.
Yes.
So funny.
Can I ask, because he's talking about there, the emissions target would become 59%, right? It's a midway between the Labor's 43% and Greens 75%. People are saying, well, 75% is crazy. There's no way that we can reduce emissions in this country by 75% by 2030, even though that's exactly what the Climate Council is telling us that we have to do. So
the crazy Climate Council.
Is this wacky, insane, crazy, batshit Greens target possible? And if so, how?
The United Kingdom, under that well-known raving leftist Boris Johnson, has got a 68% by 2030 cut, right? 68% by 2030. In Germany, they've just formed a new government headed by the equivalent of the Labor Party with the Greens there in the climate ministry, and they've just agreed, I think it is on 60% by 2030. So it's what other countries are doing.
This is the other thing that Labor said. They haven't just said we won't enter into a coalition or a deal to form government, but if we try and legislate this target, this 43%, we are not budging on that target whatsoever. We will not negotiate it. We will abandon legislating this for the sake of regulating it if we have to. We're just not going to do any horse trading whatsoever on this piece of legislation if it comes before the Parliament.
I mean, I think people are kind of a bit sick of this take it or leave it politics, especially when it comes to something as critical as climate. I think there is a real desire for politicians to just get their shit together and pass some legislation that is actually going to start cutting pollution. And the idea that Labor would, let their perfect be the enemy of the good and say it's our way or the highway and you take this or you go home is, I think, I don't think it'll go down that well.
I can hear right now somewhere there's like a Labor hack spying on this podcast being like, but you're saying, but don't take it or leave it, but the CPRS.
That's what
that
did.
They're like just absolutely losing their mind right now. But yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing. Like, I think the fact that the Greens are heading into this federal election clearly really pushing for balance of power. We're trying to win balance of power in both the Senate and in the lower house. And it's also the first federal election where you are the leader of the Australian Greens. And perhaps that's not a coincidence. First Green elected to the lower house in a federal election, and to have immediately been thrust into a balance of power situation. Like, how did that feel different then? And do you think that that's part of why we're really driven as a party? Has that experience kind of driven you to like push us to get back into that position and do the kind of things we could do then?
Yeah, good question. I mean, a number of things. One is that it's like, well, we got stuff done, right? We got dental into Medicare for kids and we cut pollution, and it's the only time pollution is meaningfully cut.
Yeah.
As well as that terrific other list that was read out on Sky News, all those other things that we got as well. Like, it actually worked. And one of the things that we found I found over the years through door knocking, through talking to people who are thinking about voting Green, one of the things that people will sometimes say is, love what you're saying, agree with it, and think you've got the best policies, but how are you going to implement them?
Yeah.
Right? And one of the things that we can point to is a time that we've actually got it implemented, and that I think that time is coming around again.
Yeah.
That's what the polls are suggesting. It's a really finely balanced parliament at the moment. We've actually got a real pathway for change there. And so to say, like, there's a number of ways that Greens can get things done, and the most common of which is that we keep banging on about something for a while and the other parties ridicule it and then they pick it up and adopt it and pretend it was their own all along, like an anti-corruption commission, for example.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think is that really does make it feel like that we're back in that, or we're in that situation where we could be that close, is that we've got campaigns, for example, in Queensland, in Griffith and in Ryan, where we've got these really big and strong people-powered campaigns that are that saw us get 10% swings, for 10% plus swings in the state election. And in those, what I think is exciting and has probably gone under the radar a bit is that those campaigns have just continued, and the people power has continued, and the door knocking and the volunteers and the phone calls has continued. And that's happening in a few places around the country. And it's actually really exciting, right? I'm testament to the fact that people power can win. Like, after we won in 2010 and then in 2013, they Liberal and Labor both realised, oh, hang on, actually when you put the Greens in, they get things done. And they realised that as much as they pretend to hate each other, they feel that they've got more in common with each other than they do with us. And we had to, they did a preference deal, and we had to overcome the combined might of Liberal and Labor together combined, and knowing that none of them was going to help us, that we had to win in our own right. And we did it through people power. And there's this, I have this real sense now, like, you've got tens of thousands of people marching in the street with the student strikers, for example, saying the same things we're saying. No more coal and gas, like, time to get out, time to get onto renewables. You've even now got Joe Biden getting up saying it's time to tax the billionaires and make the big corporations pay tax. It really feels like there's this local and global push on to tackle the climate crisis and the inequality crisis, which is why it sort of feels pretty exciting for me.
Yeah.
The thing is that the hard reality at the moment is that, fortunately, it's going to be very doable to push Scott Morrison out of majority government. It's only a 0.5% swing uniform across the country to do that, which translates to 828 people in 2 seats changing their votes, and Scott Morrison loses majority. So it's really, really close, which is great. But for Labor to form a majority government in its own right, because there's all these third voices, including us sitting in the parliament, they have to get sort of around about a 3.5% swing, and they've only got sort of in that plus 3% range once in the last 20 years, which was the Kevin 07 election, right?
That's when they had a really small agenda, right? They had a really small target, and they didn't talk about big ideas or anything, and they just played it really close to the centre, and they didn't try and sell us on a big vision about what Australia could be.
So it's I think it's very difficult to see how they can do that. Probably it's a likely outcome on the polls and on the history, and it will be enhanced if we can gain in Griffith or McNamara or Ryan or Richmond or one of those seats around the country as well. It'll really increase the likelihood of that happening.
I get my little Queensland pride out, because there was a massive door knocking day across a bunch of campaigns in Queensland, but in Griffith, they just beat your 2013 campaign record for one-on-one conversations with voters. So you have to up your game a little bit, Adam.
Yeah, that makes me very happy. That makes me very happy to hear that.
Yeah,
that's great.
So exciting. It's the biggest campaign that the Greens have ever run in the country.
In 2010, we did a bit of a shift and said, no, we're going to start to decentralise our campaign a bit and have some door knocking. And then during the course of that first term, we had someone from our team go over and be part of the Obama campaign for a while and hang out and learn some lessons from there. And I still remember them coming back with a mantra of yard signs, which is what they call the signs they put up in the yard. Yard signs don't vote, right? Yeah. It's like was their mantra. It's like what we've got to do is go and like, yes, we need that because it's critical to build this kind of visibility wall everywhere. When you see all these signs up, that's amazing. So I'm not saying don't put the sign up in your yard, but that thing of saying to people we then want to go and have the conversations was a big thing for us to do, but it worked. What Queensland in particular are doing, what's happening right around the country really, because it's key to us winning not just our House seats but our Senate seats, is really working. And if I can, just on the Senate too, I mean, we're in with a real shot in the Senate of becoming the largest third party in the Senate ever, right? And potentially having balance of power in the Senate too. And the double bonus is that if we, in some states like Queensland and New South Wales, we get someone up, we could kick out One Nation or kick out someone like One Nation, which would be like, two for the price of one. Yeah. So like all of this this movement, this work that we've been doing for years and years, it feels like it's really reaching a crescendo.
And this is the beautiful thing about door knocking, as you say, like it kind of runs contrary to a lot of what politics has become, where it's very centralized and all of the messaging is so tightly controlled. There is a moment when you have these conversations a lot of the time where first of all you realize like, wow, there's fucking good people in the world. People are not horrible people, despite what you see on Sky News or whatever. People are good people. And you can also see the moment that something in their eyes just changes. I had a conversation recently. I was sort of going all right. And then I said tax billionaires and her eyes just lit up. And we just suddenly were so animated. It's like we'd been friends for years. And those conversations are just so inspiring, but they're also, we know, the best way to win votes.
Yeah, I mean, it's about changing it from being a monologue to being a dialogue. Like, it's not one-way communication. As you're saying, Emerald, when someone just fronts up, it's like, I'm a volunteer, I'm not getting paid to do this, I'm here because I want refugees to be treated like people, or I want to stop the planet burning, or I want to tax billionaires and I just want to have a conversation with you, people love it.
Yeah.
They haven't had people have political conversations with them before about things they care about. And it's a buzz, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's addictive. It really is.
Have you ever gotten into a fight on a door knock, Adam, where someone really taken it up to you and let you know exactly what they think of you and your goddamn greedy hippie politics?
The worst that I've got is I knocked on one door and opened the door and said, "Oh, yeah, hi, I'm from the Greens, I'm your local candidate." And the guy just stood there and then just slowly closed the door in front of me. And he was like, didn't say a word, just like watched eye-to-eye contact as he shut the door. But like, that's it, right? Like, people are generally, even people who disagree with you, I still think we're pretty good in this country about just saying, I just don't want to talk to you, sorry. But they don't have fights. Like sure, people will feel passionately about something, but they also respect the fact that you're there to have a conversation.
Yeah.
And it sounds, I mean, I joined the party officially last year, and so I've been a member throughout the entire pandemic, not allowed to door knock, and have been spending my entire every waking moment online. And obviously, online is a massive part of a strategy in politics in 2021, but getting the fuck off the computer, talking to people in real life. I haven't done it yet. I'm still scared. But the idea of doing that, having conversations, realizing that people are not ideologically wedded to things necessarily. They just want a better life, and they're open to hearing new ideas about how you can do that.
Even just trotting about in the sunshine, it's just lovely.
Yeah, it is. And you get to hang out. And look, I love it when there's a couple that comes along to ours. It's like, oh, yeah, we met on a door knock. Oh. It's like we met at one of the events. It's like, it's very sweet.
So cute.
It's so cute.
It's fun.
So nice.
Yeah.
This is the church of door knocking. Everyone should go door knocking.
We're pro baby, pro door knocking. All right, you have to go and continue saving the world, Adam, but we really appreciate you joining us on the show. We do a call to action, telling people to get active, what they can do to help, and we've obviously covered, we want people to door knock, we want people to volunteer for the Greens, but, the mic is yours if you want to do the final pitch to people listening or maybe watching this online with the election coming up, get them fully freaking G'd up for Greens wins right across the country, please.
Yeah, look, we're at one of the most important times in history. We've got an inequality crisis bearing down on us. We've got the climate crisis bearing down on us. We've got a short window of time in which to act, and it can be pretty easy at points like that to sometimes feel despairing and feeling like it's too hard. But I think the good news is that we're as we said before, a few hundred votes away from kicking Scott Morrison out, and we've got a really clear pathway to getting the change that we need in this country when we put the Greens in balance of power in both houses of Parliament, ideally by kicking out Pauline Hanson along the way, if we can get the icing on the cake. Mm-hmm. And when we're there, we're going to be putting on the table the things that will help fix these crises, taxing the billionaires so that we can get dental and mental health care into Medicare, build affordable houses so that housing starts getting treated as a human right instead of people getting locked out, and then getting out of coal and gas and saying it's time for no more coal and gas. All of these things are things that I think people want, and we've got the capacity to put them on the table, and it's going to be up to how well we run these campaigns in the Senate seats and in the lower house seats, which are going to be people-powered campaigns. So, no pressure, but if you're listening, it's up to you as to whether we change direction of politics in this country. But it feels to me, having been doing this for a while now, that we are really on the verge and so close to making something really exciting happen that could send this country in a completely different direction from the terrible shit we've been in under Morrison and Turnbull and Abbott. And that, to me, is a really exciting thing. And I think that now more than ever, people have got the capacity to, we only need to change a few hundred, maybe a few thousand minds across the country and get that shift. And it is so finely balanced that we could wake up the morning after the election to find Morrison gone and having a discussion about how we're going to tax the billionaires and get out of coal. And that's the kind of country that I want to live in.
Yes. So for people listening at home right now who are as excited as I am about this, what is one thing they can do right now to help make that happen?
Go and join one of the local campaigns. You don't need to sign up to be a member. You can just stick your hand up and volunteer to be part of the door knocking or phone calling that's happening. And if neither of those two things are your thing, then there's a lot of work behind the scenes that needs to be done to get those signs up, to enter all of the data that we get. There's lots of stuff that needs to be done. Get involved, stick your hand up and volunteer. And you can do that right now without having to leave your seat.
Sweet.
To give you an idea, I joined my local branch and went to the first meeting about the campaign and was immediately elected campaign coordinator because no one else wanted to do it. So dreams can come true, guys. Join the Greens.
Right. Yeah, we can put it, and we'll put a link in the show notes as well. But I think it'll just be greens.org.au/volunteer. And if you put your details in there, they'll link you up with your local campaign. You'll probably get a call from a volunteer or a team member, and they'll say, "Hey, come along to this thing. Let's get campaigning. Let's win."
Let's do it. Adam Bandt, thank you so much for joining us, mate. Thank you very much. Have a great Christmas.
Thanks, Adam.
Thank you, Tom. Thanks, everyone. Have a great break. Stay safe.
What are you going to do about it? It's a two-party system. You have to vote for one of us.
You're right. This is a two-party system. Well, I believe I'll vote for a third-party candidate.
Go ahead. Throw your vote away.
Adam Bandt, everybody. Yay. Go to greens.org.au/volunteer to help out.
Make our biggest fan happy.
Yeah, make him happy. Just find out the name of the Greens candidate in your local area. That's step one. Then take it from there. Thank you so much for listening to our third episode of our little show. Serious Danger is produced by Michael Griffin, made possible with the help of the Green Institute. Rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening right now. Tell everyone how good we are. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Serious Danger AU. You can become a patron at patreon.com/Serious Danger AU. We're on YouTube. All the details, seriousdangerpod.com. And you can email us too, hello@seriousdangerpod.com with your feedback, thoughts, questions. Let's finish on another fucking inspiring Peter Cundall quote.
The world as I see it right now is in peril, but the driving force behind the danger that the world's enduring now is again the same old thing. Human greed for resources and resistance from those people who are polluting this planet more than anything else. They're resisting because they don't see the long-term things. They only see the short-term profits, and they don't care about our kids and our grandkids. Well, we do, and that's why we're fighting.
What a legend. Thank you, Emerald Moon.
Thanks, Tom Ballard.
Serious Danger, Australia.